Hello, this is Pastor Doug McCoy from the West Side Christian Church. I want to thank you for watching one of our recent messages here online. Also want to extend an invitation to you to join us in person. We do gather as a group physically in person at a place called the McCoy Center in Hilliard. It's right behind the Crooked Can, right off of Main Street. Usually we're there at 10 a.m., but you may want to check our calendar before you come. Sometimes we are on the move. When we're there at the McCoy, this is what you can expect. We all come in 9:30, 10 o'clock. We greet one another, we fellowship, spend some time, talk a little bit, get to know each other, encourage, comfort each other if need be. 10 o'clock, we start our service. We have some songs, a few announcements. Sometimes we take communion to remember the sacrifice and the resurrection of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. We may take up a free will offering where people contribute to God's work financially as they feel led. And then we have a message very much like the one that you are about to watch here today. Usually we spend about an hour together. We depart with smiles, hugs, handshakes, all those wonderful things, because we are trying to be a family doing God's mission together. If that sounds good to you, we would love to have you. Once again, that's 10 a.m. at the McCoy Center, West Side Christian Church. Look forward to meeting you. December 21st, 3 Sundays ago, I guess 3 weeks ago, 4 Sundays if you count this Sunday. We were talking about Jesus being love's pure light from Silent Night, and also from John chapter 1, I think. I told you a story about my Greek professor and I when I was at my first Bible college in West Virginia, and how we were peeling a roof off an old house and throwing the shingles in the back of the truck, and he told me to get off the roof, and I jumped, and without knowing there was a bunch of nails in the back of the truck, and just by the grace of God missed them all. I don't know if you remember that story or not. Here's what I didn't tell you about that story. My Greek professor's name was Rick Mathena. Mathena is a Greek last name. Now, Rick was not Greek. He was 100% West Virginian. Nothing wrong with that. But I always thought it was appropriate that the Greek professor had a Greek last name, and the meaning of that name is disciple, which is very appropriate. It's a word used repeatedly in the New Testament. So that was his name. He wasn't just my Greek professor, he was also my boss. He ran the summer camp, which was right next to the Bible college. And he hired me to be the groundskeeper there, the caretaker. And so sometimes I would mow the grass, but then sometimes he and I would go and just do various projects together. So over the 4 years we were together, we got pretty close. I believe there was one Thanksgiving that I couldn't return home, and he had me over to his house, and he made me eat turkey with mustard. He said, yeah, I didn't think it was that bad, but it was kind of weird, you know. But I said, okay. So he liked to put mustard on his turkey, so that's the way we did Thanksgiving. After I told you that story on December 21st, the very next morning, I was told that Rick passed away sometime that night. Yeah, and I really couldn't believe it. It was like I was just talking about him yesterday, and then he passes away. I believe it was the night of the 21st, and then I found out about it on the 22nd. So that hurt, obviously. It's sad to hear, and something that I carried with me all the way through the holiday season. Fast forward from there to this past Monday, January 5th. The staff asked me to tell them what I would be preaching the next several weeks. They wanted to get a leg up on their work, get some things done early. This is a fair request, so I said, all right. Now, the way that I've been doing things, I don't know if you realize it or not, but I'm not doing any kind of series or consecutive ideas. I'm just, whatever comes up in my devotions, that's what I preach that week. And anytime something comes up in my devotions, I write it down in a list. Right now, the list will carry us at least through September of this year. So I've got lots of ideas to work with, but I decided to select the ones that we wanted for the next 6 weeks that I thought would be best for us. And as I was doing that, a phrase came to my mind. It's a phrase that's come to my mind repeatedly over the years, and that phrase was, flee to the rock. So I'm looking at all these biblical phrases, and I hear this phrase in my head, flee to the rock, which is something that I come back to every now and then. And suddenly I realized, I said to myself, do you know where you learned that? You learned that from Rick. And not only did you learn that from Rick, but you learned that from a specific message that Rick used to preach. See, Rick was, in addition to being a professor and in addition to being the director of the camp, he would preach at churches in the area. So there was a lot of little churches around the Bible college, and they would call us when they needed somebody to fill the pulpit. The pastor was out or they didn't have a pastor, whatever, they would call us. So I would go out a lot of times. That's why you may have heard me tell you there were times that I preached the same sermon 8 times in 1 month. Because I was going church to, and I didn't even have to work at it. I just press play in my brain and it just comes out there. Well, Rick was like that too. The difference was Rick had this special sermon. I think in your notes I called it a famous sermon. And people would not only call him to preach, but they would call him specifically to preach this sermon. So they would request, when they call him up and say, we need somebody for Sunday, and will you do this message? And he would come and do it. One week he was doing a revival. I don't know if you're familiar with revivals, but that's where they have preaching all the way through the week. And I believe this revival ended on a Sunday night. I wasn't busy that night, so I went there and I heard this famous message. And my memory, being what my memory is, I remembered it. I think that's the only sermon that I can say that I remembered. I mean, I've heard lots of sermons. I can tell you lots of things that happened, in them. But I don't think there's any other sermon, except for there is one other that I remember the outline. But I don't think there's any other sermon where I could say I remember pretty much start to finish the way that went. So I said to myself, when this idea came into my head Monday as I was planning out our preaching for the next couple of weeks, I said, you know what you can do? You can recreate that sermon. You can recreate Rick's famous sermon and bring that to Westside Christian Church. And I thought about that this morning. I said, that would be fun. That would honor Rick a little bit, I think. And it would bring truth to my friends, some truths that have been in my life ever since I first heard this sermon, probably way back in 1996. So that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to try to recreate by memory Rick's famous sermon. We'll start with the text that he used. Every sermon must come from a text. Every sermon really should be the text. We sometimes say, I'm preaching on this or I'm preaching from this. The reality is we are preaching this. There's a truth in the text that we are trying to bring out to our friends and to our church family. So Rick had a text. It was Proverbs 30, verses 24 through 28. I gave it to you there in your notes. And we're using the American Standard Version. That's not very familiar among us today, I don't think, but I know for a fact that this is what Rick used because there's wording, there's language here that I remember. So Proverbs 30, 24 through 28, American Standard Version, this is what we find. There are 4 things which are little upon the earth, but they are exceeding wise. The ants are a people not strong, yet they provide their food in the summer. The Conies are but a feeble folk, yet they make their houses in the rocks. The locusts have no king, yet they go forth all of them by bands. The lizard, or the King James Version says, the spider taketh hold with her hands, yet she is in kings' palaces. So that's the text that Rick was preaching that night when I was there, and every time that he did this famous sermon. The title that he gave this message was 3 Bugs and a Bunny. Again, little West Virginian. My titles are very different. As you know, I like to pull out just a phrase from the scripture. If I were to title it, I'd probably call it Weak but Wise or Small but Smart, something like that. Of course, you probably wouldn't remember that, right? I remember 3 Bugs and a Bunny, so I guess it worked. So that's the title of this message. Now, Book of Proverbs, I think you're probably familiar with it. It's one of what we call the wisdom books of the Old Testament. There's 5 there, Psalms, Proverbs, Job, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. Sometimes we call them poetry. Sometimes we call them wisdom poetry. But they are about how to be wise, how to live, not just righteously, not sinfully, but also productively, beneficially. That's what the wisdom books are about. Proverbs mostly is a collection of proverbs. They're just these little 2-line sayings, maxims. Very short, very poignant, very powerful. They are easy to memorize, and they, if you store a couple up in your mind, they can be directing the way that you live. So the majority of the book from chapter 10 on is mostly just these little proverbs. There's no larger story. There's no context. There's no connection from Proverbs to Proverbs. As we get close to the end, though, we start coming up with these, I guess you just call them little extra things that Solomon had. Solomon did most of the Proverbs, but I think he also collected some wisdom from some other sources. Here in chapter 30, he says he collected wisdom from this guy named, I say it, King Agur. If you look at the top of the chapter there, it says the scenes of King Agur, A-G-U-R. It probably is not how you pronounce it, but that's just what seems best to me. If you look at this chapter, you'll see that there were several little passages where Agur or Solomon say there are three things, yes, even four. So they're looking at commonalities in the natural. I don't know how many of those there are. I didn't count them. But they're looking at things that are similar to each other. And from that, they draw a message or a truth that they believe is going to guide us today. In this particular case, they have seen a similarity between four animals. And I guess three are insect, but one's a mammal. That's your three bugs and a bunny. That's where Rick got that title. And there is the commonality between them is that I think the American Standard Version says they're little. The NIV may say that they are small. But these are your weaker creatures. These are not strong, powerful animals. These are the small, the weak, the overlooked, the ones that people don't pay very much attention to, the ones that are going to have a harder time here in this life. And yet Solomon and Agur, they have said, despite being small, these creatures are also wise. They have found ways to get along. They have found ways to survive. They have found ways to thrive. They have found ways to overcome the difficulties that being small, being weak, being overlooked have brought upon our lives. So Solomon sees this, Agur sees this, and they put this together in this little form and said, here's these four animals that are weak but wise, small but smart. Rick saw that too. I don't know what his process was, but I imagine he was just reading the scriptures one day and he saw that and he said that would make a good sermon, and it absolutely did, and it became famous throughout the region. And today, I want to bring that same message to you. I want us to look at these four creatures which are weak but wise, which are small but strong, and what they can contribute to our lives today. So we'll take them. We're not going to go in order. We're going to do the bugs first, and we will get to the bunny last. First of the bugs is the ant. You see that there. Ants are mentioned twice in the book of Proverbs. I thought it was more than that. I just thought there was a lot of discussion about ants in Proverbs, but it turns out there's just two. Both times that they are used, they are put to us as an example of industriousness. And you have to forgive me for the big word. I couldn't, it just means hardworking, but it didn't sound right when I said they're an example of hardworking. So, but that's what they are. The ants are hardworking. They are hard workers. They are industrious. You see this in the other place they pop up in Proverbs. And I just gave this to you just because I think it's kind of funny, but Proverbs 6:6, go to the ant, you sluggard, consider its ways and be wise. Do you know what a sluggard is? That's a slacker. It's that's a person that doesn't like to do too much. And Solomon is saying, hey, sluggard, you ought to go take a look at the ant and the way that they work and learn a lesson for yourself. So similar idea here as we come towards the end of the book, chapter 30. The difference here, though, is that we're not just told they're industrious, but they are preemptively industrious. They are hardworking in advance. They not only work when they have to work, but they work to make things easier for the days to come. So they are working in advance. We're told here that they store up food in the summer, or they provide their food is the way the American Standard says it, in the summer. What he means there is that they are hoarding food when they have a chance. They're storing food in the summer because they know there's going to be no food to store in the winter. So they want to eat in the winter as well as the summer, so they don't just eat in the summer, but they also work in the summer to preserve some of that food that they can have it in later days. So they are storing up for themselves. They are preparing in advance for what is to come. Now, is this a foreign idea to you? Absolutely not. You've heard this many times in many ways. Probably, if you haven't heard it here from Proverbs, you've probably heard it from one of Aesop's fables. Aesop was a little younger than Solomon. He's 300 years after Solomon or so. So I was concerned about that. I was like, Solomon didn't borrow this from Aesop, did he? No, Aesop borrowed this from Solomon. But he took it and he turned it into a neat little story. You may know the grasshopper, the ants and the grasshopper, or the grasshopper and the ants. Are you familiar with that? You might really be familiar with it because Disney turned it into one of their silly symphonies. So there is a cartoon version of it. But what happens is that in the summertime, the grasshopper is fiddling and he's dancing and he's having a good time and the ants are all working. Then the winter hits and the grasshopper is starving and he goes to the ants and he asks for help. Now in Aesop's fable, the ants tell him to hit the road. Sorry about your luck. See you later. In the Disney version, they take him in and they take care of him. In real life, I would probably have told him, take a hike, and then I would have felt bad and went and took him some food. That's kind of how I operate. But in any case, you see that idea, and you see a contrast. The one people stored up for the winter, and they were fine. The other didn't store up for the winter, and he starved. We see this in many other phrases that we have as well. One of my favorites is make hay while the sun shines. That's actually a Proverbs. Proverbs 10 is where I thought it was an Ohioism. I thought it was something Ohio farmers said. I thought that's where I got it. But no, it's in the book of Proverbs. Here is when you should be working. And if you do, then you're going to have something saved up for the hard times to come. We also have dig your well before you're thirsty. I saw a book by that title one time and I never forgot. You may not be thirsty now, but you're going to be thirsty someday. When you're thirsty, it may be too late to dig your well. So dig your well now. Dig your well before you're thirsty. Save your pennies for a rainy day. Another similar idea. I could go on and on. I think one of the things that I say to my ladies is don't let life get on top of you. You get on top of life. Don't let life get on top of you. So many others that we could go through, but this is the idea. You can't just live for today, or you can, but you'll be like the grasshopper. It's not going to end up well for you. It's far better to prepare for tomorrow. That's how the ants were wise. That's how we can be wise. We can store up for the future. That's the first bug. Move on to the second, and that's locusts. Locusts are mentioned repeatedly in the scriptures. There are big parts, especially of the Old Testament, into the New Testament as well. Though locusts were one of the 10 plagues of Egypt, locusts ravaged the land of Israel during the time of the prophet Joel, and he writes a whole chapter about them, describing in detail what they did to the landscape. John the Baptist ate locusts and honey. If you remember, so locusts pop up repeatedly in scriptures. This is the only time that they pop up in Proverbs, though, and the way that they work here in Proverbs, what they are an example of is cooperation. Locusts are willing and able to cooperate with each other. And they not only cooperate with each other, but they cooperate with each other on kind of a military level. They have a high degree of organization. The proverb is said that the locusts have no king, yet they go forth all of them by bands. Kind of difficult in American Standard. I think the NIV says they go forward in ranks. So again, using that military terminology, that there is an organization here. There is an intent in the way that they move here. And if you ever see a locust plague, you can look them up on YouTube. There's videos of them. That's what it looks like. It looks like an invading army coming in and systematically just stripping the land of every green thing. What's interesting about this is that not just that they cooperate with each other, but that nobody makes them cooperate with each other. That's what he means when he says they have no king. There is nobody telling them to do this, nobody making them do this, nobody forcing them to do this. They just apparently figured out, maybe by instinct. I don't know how intelligent locusts may be. I don't know what kind of thoughts they have, but it's either by instinct or it's by intelligence that they say, this will go better if we work together. And so that's what they do. They cooperate with each other. Again, is this an idea that you are unfamiliar with? No, we are aware, at least on some level, we are aware of the value of cooperating with other people. Again, I could give you multiple examples. I was going to talk about It's a Wonderful Life, because whenever I turn on It's a Wonderful Life, I always get to the scene where George is trying to save the building and loan. And he has this plan that if everybody will just take what they need, they can get through the hard time. And then I think there's that guy, Tom. You remember Tom? Tom wants it all. He wants to close out his account. I think $212 or something like that. He wants it all. And he almost, because at the end, they only have $2 left. So if it hadn't been for Tom, they would have had $200 left. So he almost tanked them all. Tom couldn't cooperate, wanted to go for himself. I thought a better example, though, might be Gladiator, a little bit of a violent movie. Not sure everybody would appreciate that, but if you're familiar with Gladiator, big hit in 2000. Maximus is a Roman soldier, centurion captain, something like that. They turn on him and they put him in the, what's that thing called? The Colosseum. They put him in the Colosseum and they make him fight for his life. Well, his first fight, there's all these other slaves with him, and there's a big gate, and something's going to come out the gate and slaughter them, and they don't know what it is. And Maximus just looks at the others and he says, whatever comes out that gate, we got a much better chance of survival if we work together. Sometimes we tell each other, we're all in this together. One time when I was in California, Aubrey was just a baby and Heather was sick, so I'm trying to take care of both of them. And one lady came up to me and she said, I'll help you out a little bit. We're all in this together. So we have that idea as well. John Donne, if we want to go way back to classical poetry, John Donne was a Christian poet. He said, no man is an island. Are you familiar with that? Simon and Garfunkel tried to flip it. I am a rock. I am an island. I agree more with John Donne than I agree with Simon and Garfunkel. No man is an island. That's the one where he says, ask not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. And what he means is that every time somebody passes on, we all get a little weaker because our survival really is dependent upon each other. Now, I am a rugged individualist. I was taught in Westland High School. I remember the history teacher. I can't remember his name, but he said America was made by rugged individualists and we ought to be rugged individualists. I am a rugged individualist, but I also understand other rugged individualists can be a big help sometimes. And that's what the Locusts understood. This is how they were wise. This is how we can be wise. We can cooperate with each other. Third and last bug, maybe, that is the spider. This is the only time spiders appear in Proverbs. It's the only time they appear in the Bible. It's the only time this word appears in the Bible. That's why we don't exactly know how to translate it. You probably saw that the American Standard says lizard and the King James says spider. Animals are very difficult to translate because you don't have the same animals all over the world. We may not have this animal here in America, and so we don't know how to translate it. And when something only appears one time in the Bible, we don't have any context. So that makes it a little difficult either. Rick went with spider, and he went with spider for a somewhat good reason. He just wanted there to be 3 bugs, right? 2 bugs, a reptile, and a mammal is not nearly as catchy as 3 bugs and a bunny. So Rick went with the bugs, and he said it's a spider. Whatever it is doesn't matter. The point is that we're told it's small. And it says here, the American Standard says, she taketh hold with her hands. We think what that means is you can capture them in your hands, which again, a child can capture a spider with their hands. A child can capture a lizard with their hands. So again, we're dealing with a small creature, but he goes on to say they can be found in kings' palaces. So they're small, but you can't keep them out. You can't keep them out of the most regal, the most special places on earth. And Rick had a story about this. He said that he and his wife, they toured some ritzy place in West Virginia. I'm not exactly sure what it was. I think it was probably the Greenbrier. Have you ever heard of the Greenbrier? Yeah, the Greenbrier is this resort. I guess it's high-end, high-dollar resorts right there. I think it's pretty close to the Virginia border. So it takes a lot of money to get in there, but that's not the only special thing about the Greenbrier. What we didn't know for a couple of decades was that there's a government bunker underneath it. The government built a bomb shelter underneath this high-end resort, and it wasn't just any bomb shelter. It was where the president and Congress were going to go in case of a nuclear war. So they almost took JFK there during the Cuban Missile Crisis. They ultimately didn't, but they were talking about it. So that's what this was built for. So you not only have the hotel staff trying to keep the riffraff like me out, right? But you've got the military trying to keep everybody out. And Rick and his wife are taking a tour of this place, and Rick says they walked into one room and he looked up, and there in the corner was a spider web. So you've got hotel staff, you've got military guards keeping everybody away. They couldn't keep the spider away. They couldn't keep the lizard away. It still managed to sneak in there. So we know this is a fact. We know this is what these animals are capable of. What that means, though, is a little more cryptic. The ants are obvious. The locusts are obvious. This one's a little more cryptic. I don't believe God is telling us to go sneak into king's palaces or sneak in to ritzy places. I think what he's telling us here is to ignore status. That's what you see with this animal, whether it's a peasant hut or it's a king's castle, it needs a place to build its web and catch its food. And it says, hey, this will do. I'll sneak in and I'll build here. I don't care what it is. I don't care what you are. I'm going to make my web. I'm going to catch my food. And that is a biblical idea. We see this repeatedly in the Bible. I'll just give you two. Remember when Samuel selected David? God sent him to anoint the new king, and he goes and looks at the sons of Jesse, and the first one comes out, and he's big and he's strong, and Samuel says, this has got to be it. This has got to be the king. And God speaks to him and says, do not go by external appearances. Man looks at appearances. I look at the heart. And then centuries later, Paul would say the same thing. He tells us in Galatians chapter 2, he was selected to be an apostle apart from the others. So he never got to hang out with Peter, James, and John. He wasn't part of the 12, but Jesus appeared to him on the road to Damascus, gave him the truth, made him an apostle. He began to spread that truth. It was 15 years before he finally meets up with the rest of the apostles. I think he's talking about Acts 15, where they all came together to determine whether Gentiles needed to be circumcised or not. And he was a part of that. So he comes down and meets with the others. And he tells us in Galatians, he says, as for those who seem to be important, talking about the 12, whatever they were makes no difference to me. God does not judge by external appearances. So there we get it in the Old Testament. There we get it in the New Testament. We tend to be swayed by appearance. Samuel was. We can be as well. We can be influenced by status. We can be intimidated by status. We can be infatuated by status. Either we want to shy away from it because we feel less than, or we want to go to it because we think it's going to contribute something to our life. The spider is immune to status. It just wants to build its web. It just wants to catch a couple flies. Doesn't care if you're a king or not. That's how the spiders are wise. That's how we can be wise. Just ignore status. Be immune to it. So those are the bugs. That leaves us with one last animal, one last creature, probably the best one or the funnest one. And that is the coney. Coney is the word that the American Standard uses. They're called hyraxes, I think. In the NIV, again, they're animals that we may not have over here, and so they're difficult to translate. I've also been told that they're called rock badgers. But I remember very clearly when Rick did this sermon, he said they are like bunnies. And I remember him doing this. You know what this signifies? Well, yeah, about this size and shape. This would be the head of the bunny. This would be the back side of the bunny. So there you go. I remember him saying conies like bunnies and doing this. I have believed that since 1996. He said conies are like bunnies. I said, oh, he must be telling the truth. And so I've always believed. This week, I decided to look it up. And this is what I found. Yeah, you know, is that a bunny? I don't think so. I'm not sure. But it's pretty much the same class. Okay, we're not talking about an elephant. We're not talking about a rhinoceros. We're not talking about a gorilla, a lion. We're not talking about any of these animals that can be a problem for you. It's a rodent, yes. It's a varmint is what it is. This is the varmint class beast that we are dealing with here. And what we're told about these varmints, again, we're told that they're small, but that they make their homes in the rocks. And we see that again. They're mentioned 4 times in the Bible, all in the Old Testament. Leviticus, Deuteronomy tells us that they're unclean. The Jews weren't to eat these animals. So they really don't have much reason to go hunt them. But Psalm 104 and Proverbs 30, they tell us they make their home in the rock. Psalm 104 specifically says they take refuge in the rock. So if something is chasing them, whether it's a human or whether it's another animal that intends to do them harm, they go to the rocks and they are able to get into these crags, these crevices, and they are safe in there. And what Rick said, the lesson that he drew from that was, when we are in danger, we flee to the rock. Now, For the Coney, the rock was a rock. I mean, it's a literal boulder with cracks in it that he goes into. For us, the rock is what? The Lord, our God. We are told this repeatedly. I stopped counting. I looked up how many times God is called rock in the Bible, and once I got to 20, I just stopped counting because I felt the idea is probably obvious enough. I did give you an example here, though, Psalm 18:2, probably the best of them all. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. My God is my rock, so we get it twice, in whom I take refuge. There's a whole lot of other synonyms there. Fortress, tower, stronghold, shield, that he has wings that protect us, that we take shelter or hide in his shadow. All sorts of ideas like this in Scripture. We see it in our songs as well. When I was a teen, Petra had a song called You Are My Rock. Petra was a Christian rock band, if you don't know, very popular when I was a teen. They just put out some new music last week, I think. I told my daughter I wasn't interested. I told her, usually when these bands come out with new music, you like the vintage stuff. I'm sorry, Petra, I love you, but I'm going to stick with the vintage. But they had a vintage song say, "You are my rock, my fortress, my shield. You are my rock. Let your strength be revealed." I listened to that hundreds of times when I was a teenager. We've got "A Mighty Fortress is Our God," written by Martin Luther. "On Christ, the solid rock I stand. All other ground is sinking sand. Under his wings I am safely abiding. Though the night deepens and tempests are wild, still I can trust him. I know he will keep me. He has redeemed me, and I am his child." And on and on and on I go. So we are familiar with this idea that God is our rock, fortress, refuge, salvation, safety, whatever term you want to use, God is that for us. And what we're being told here is when you need him, when you need safety, when you need a shield, when you need a rock, this is where you go. Again, the temptation is to do what? To fight, right? Somebody posted on Facebook, you've probably seen this, maybe you posted, don't mean to make fun of you if you did, but something like, "The devil came and whispered to me, the storm is coming, and I said back to the devil, I am the storm." Love that to be true. I would love if that were true, that if I were just a storm and I could just take care of any problem, physical, intellectual, financial, political, social, familial, any problem I have, I can take care of it myself because I'm a storm. Is it true? No, it's not true. I can handle a couple of small problems, maybe. The big problems I need a lot of help with. And there's one helper that's greater than them all, and that's the rock, the Lord our God. This is how the Conies are wise, the bunnies. This is how we can be wise. When we are in danger, we flee to the rock. So those are the 3 bugs and a bunny. That's the sermon, more or less, as Rick preached it. So after I heard that, again, this would have been 96, probably, maybe 97. I went up to him. They had a dinner. It was probably the last night of the revival. I'm fairly certain it was a Sunday night. It probably was the last night of the revival. They had a meal. There's always got to be a meal that's involved. So they had a meal, and he was eating, and I got something, and then I wanted to hit the road. So I went and said something. I don't remember what I said to him. I'm sure it was probably smart alecky, because that was our relation. He's the boss that's got to keep things running. I'm the 20-year-old who can afford to be snarky, so I usually was. So I probably said something smart aleck to him. I don't know what I said, but I remember his response. He said, "It takes a lifetime to write a sermon like that." And now looking back, probably that's close to 30 years, right? That's about 30 years ago. Looking back some 30 years later, I said, yep, he was absolutely right. Some things are easy. Basic biblical truth, basic biblical doctrine, basic theology. We tend to think those things are so complex, and we give them these complicated names. They're not that hard. You can teach them easily. You can learn them easily. You can pass them on easy. It's not that hard. This is wisdom. This is not doctrine. This is not basic fact. This is wisdom, and it's difficult. And it does take a lifetime to be able to understand these things and then be able to communicate them. Solomon spent a lifetime doing this. Now, he was blessed by God. God supernaturally gave him the gift of wisdom, and yet we still see that he had to observe, and he had to think about how to write these. He had to observe, and he had to preserve. He had to see it and learn it himself, and then communicate it to us, which is difficult. He spent a lifetime doing this. Rick spent a lifetime preaching this sermon, perfecting it, getting it right, influencing a lot of people with it. So it does take a lifetime to do something like that. For us, though, it's the exact opposite. For us, this wisdom is what? Just given. Just dropped into our lap. Rick had to work for it. Solomon had to work for it. Jesus is behind all of this. He didn't have to work for it, but it was hard to communicate these things to us, okay? So they're working for this. They give it to us. They drop it in our laps. What's that mean? We don't have to spend a lifetime learning it. What do we get to do? Spend a lifetime living it, correct? And that is what I am inviting you. Since we don't have to do the work of earning this, of learning it, of communicating, what I'm inviting you to today is to spend a lifetime living this. You will notice there is no invitation in this passage. There is no command in this passage. There is no you have to, you ought to, you must, you're going to go to hell if you don't. If you want to go to heaven, you have to. None of that is in this, right? The fact of the matter is, if you don't want to do these things, you don't have to. If you want to be the grasshopper rather than the ant, well, God ain't going to stop you. What's going to happen when the winter comes, though? There you go. So there is no have to here. There's more just like, hey, this is a pretty good idea. And that's what I'm inviting you to here today. This is a pretty good idea. Would you like to pick up that idea? Would you like to incorporate that idea into the way that you think and the way that you evaluate and the way that you live? I am inviting you today to learn the lessons of the 3 bugs and the 1 bunny. I'm inviting you to learn to prepare for the future, like the ants, to cooperate with each other, like the locusts, to be immune to appearance and status, like the spider, and most of all, to flee to the rock, like the coney. Hey, it's me again. Wanted to thank you a second time for watching, spending this time with us. We really appreciate it. We would love you to be connected with us. We would love to get connected with you. Several ways you can do that. You can go to our website, find all sorts of information and a Connect card to get involved there. You can also find us on social media. We're on Facebook, we're on TikTok, we're on Instagram. Look us up. You will find us, Westside Christian Church in Columbus, Ohio. Again, love to be connected with you, love to get to know you. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you again.